The seaside villa my parents bought for me was given by my husband to his secretary to live in. Rachel posted a 9-photo collage of a pool party on Twitter, along with a location tag. Thank you, President, for the luxurious villa. I'll work even harder from now on. In the photos sent by the butler, the courtyard sculpture had been smashed, and all the flowers I had planted were uprooted. I immediately threw the photos to Hugh. Young Master Coup, what's the meaning of this? Why is someone else in my villa? Hugh instantly replied with a voice message, the sound of ocean waves in the background. Don't be so petty. It's not like we're short on places to stay. In 3 hours, I want her out of there and the villa restored to its original state. Hugh read it but didn't reply. 5 minutes later, I auctioned off the villa for $1 and smashed his precious antique collection into pieces. Since someone doesn't understand boundaries, I don't mind teaching him a lesson. Chapter 1. Just as I put down my phone, the ringtone rang. It was Hugh, who had just read but not replied. Fernanda, what the hell did you do? How did Rachel get thrown out by security? Hugh's voice carried obvious anger. I spoke calmly. That villa was mine. I just sold it. The only request from the new owner was to clear out all people and belongings within an hour. There was a few seconds of silence on the other end. Fernanda, you must have misunderstood something. There's nothing between Rachel and me. She's just my secretary. Hugh's tone softened a little. Don't you think you're being too aggressive? A bit too sensitive? I couldn't help but laugh. Hugh, it's you who doesn't know how to set boundaries or keep yourself clean. And now you're turning around to accuse me? Hugh didn't respond to that, skillfully changing the subject. Fernanda, you still have so many villas under your name. It's a waste to leave them empty. I was just making good use of resources. We really didn't do anything inappropriate. He paused, his voice growing a bit impatient. Don't be so petty. I curled my lips into a smile, though my eyes grew cold. Since young Master Coup is so generous, I'm sure you won't mind your beloved treasures turning into a pile of junk, right? After speaking, I opened my album and sent over a few photos. In the photos, Hugh's cherished antique collection was smashed into pieces, fragments scattered everywhere. There was a few seconds of silence on the other end of the line. Fernanda. He pronounced my full name word by word. I knew this was a sign of his extreme fury, but I didn't care. Hugh, you must have seen the photos, right? This is the price for testing my bottom line. If you dare cross the line again, what you'll lose will be far more than just these worthless items. After finishing, I hung up the phone. Throughout our years of marriage, we rarely had intense arguments, but that didn't mean I would back down for fear of conflict. Once you start compromising your bottom line in a marriage, all it does is encourage the other party to keep pushing. Besides, the beginning of this marriage wasn't pure love in the first place. Back then, the Coup family was eager to break into the core circle of Beijing society and needed the support of our Mu family, which led to this business alliance. When we first met, Hugh did show his attentiveness and tenderness, and his face was deceptively charming. Plus he was meticulous in handling affairs. At the time, I thought that maybe living a life with someone like him wouldn't be too bad, so I didn't object to the family's arrangement. Luckily, after marriage, feelings did grow between us. We even had quite a sweet period, once seen by outsiders as a perfect match. However, no matter what stage we were at, I always clearly knew that I had to put myself first. Later, the passion faded and life became more mundane. I could understand and accept that all emotions would eventually settle down or even disappear, but I would never allow the reason for the fading to be the intrusion of a third party. Since I was young, the thing I hated most was others touching my belongings. If an object got tainted, I would throw it away without hesitation. If a person got tainted, the handling would be the same. Chapter 2. Hugh still hadn't contacted me. He had always been like this. Once his mistakes were exposed, he would choose silence to escape. Until this afternoon, a message from Robin popped up on my phone. Fernanda, why are you ignoring me? I just saw you inside the venue. I called you for so long but you didn't react. I frowned slightly and quickly replied, I didn't go out today. You must have mistaken someone else. Was it really not you? I saw that custom cobalt blue fishtail dress you had made before, and Coup President was with you. Wait, Fernanda. I just got a front-facing photo. Soon, a photo popped up on my phone. Hugh, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, and Rachel standing next to him, wearing my custom-made haute couture dress, smiling and chatting with someone. I stared at the photo for a full 10 seconds. Before I could react, another notification appeared on my screen. This time, it was from Hugh's executive assistant, accompanied by a screenshot. It was one of Rachel's tweets. First time attending the cloud top auction. Thank you President Ku for bringing me to see the real high society. Attached was a photo of her sitting in the front row of the auction, with Hugh beside her, a faint smile at the corner of his lips, clearly consenting to her selfie and caption. Suddenly, I remembered something. Hugh had always hated being photographed, even during the sweetest times of our relationship. Whenever I wanted to take a couple's photo, he would frown and refuse. Looks like the punishment I gave him this morning had been far too light. Not only did he dare to bring another woman to the most exclusive auction event of the elite circle, he even let her wear my dress, and allowed her to show off the photo publicly. I immediately forwarded the photo to Hugh. Explain this. Why is my dress on her? The message was marked as read, but there was no reply. A few minutes later, I sent another photo to him. Robin's message popped up right after. Fernanda, what did you send Ku President? He just suddenly stood up and rushed out. Rachel couldn't even stop him. I didn't reply to my best friend because Hugh's call was already coming in. In the photo I had sent, I was sitting in front of the fireplace, holding a delicate wooden box. The box's surface was spotless, clearly well maintained over time. Fernanda, put that down. Hugh's voice was slightly trembling, full of panic and anger. What do you intend to do? Inside the wooden box were carefully preserved items, several yellowed photographs, a bracelet, and a finely crafted jade pendant. The girl in the photos had a bright, radiant smile. She was Hugh's first love, a girlfriend who had passed away from illness. The Ku family had once mentioned her unintentionally. Suddenly, I understood the root of Hugh's recent strange behavior. Rachel bore a strong resemblance to his late first love. Fernanda, don't touch those things. Hugh's voice was almost pleading. Hugh, you know very well, I have always hated people touching my things. Just like how you're feeling right now. Now, have Rachel take off that dress immediately. There's a lounge at the auction venue. Tell her to change out of it. There was a few seconds of silence on the other end. Fernanda, didn't you usually only wear those dresses once? What's the big deal about letting her wear an old one? I chuckled lightly, but my tone grew even colder. Hugh, my things, even if I don't want them anymore, are not for others to touch. You have two choices. Either have Rachel change out of that dress before the auction starts, or, I shook the box lightly, making the items inside rattle softly. Deal with the consequences. After saying that, I hung up the phone directly. Chapter 3. In the time that followed, Robin's messages kept popping up. Fernanda, what on earth did you say to him? Your Ku president rushed in, face completely pale, and without a word dragged Rachel out. Wait, they're back. Oh my god, what is going on? Rachel is wearing a janitor's uniform? I curled my lips into a smile. This outcome was even better than I had expected. Fernanda, Rachel's expression, it's absolutely priceless. Everyone's whispering and staring at them. I'm getting second-hand embarrassment just watching. Robin, take a few photos for me. Robin quickly sent me several pictures. In the photos, Hugh Ku sat stiffly, expressionless. Rachel, on the other hand, was wearing a gray janitor's uniform that clearly didn't fit her. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were red and swollen. This auction is extremely high-end, no leaving allowed midway. That girl's gonna have to sit through the entire event in that janitor outfit. Robin's tone was full of schadenfreude. Your Ku president's face is darker than the bottom of a burnt pot. Fernanda, this move of yours is just brutal. And Rachel too. Of all the people she could have messed with, she dared to mess with you. Now she probably doesn't even know how she's ended up so miserably. After the auction ended, Robin sent another message. When they were leaving, your husband's face had turned completely purple with anger, and Rachel was crying so hard she could barely breathe. Robin sent a new photo. That cobalt blue fishtail dress was now dumped in a trash bin. Fernanda, got the photo. I immediately posted the photo on Twitter, with a simple caption, trash belongs in the trash can. Within 5 minutes, the likes had shot past 100. Anyone smart enough could instantly tell that the dress in the trash was the very same one Rachel had proudly shown off in her earlier tweet. My meaning was crystal clear. Fernanda, after today, coup president's reputation is ruined. He's not going to come home and make trouble for you. Is he? I lazily replied, don't worry. Even if he had more guts, he wouldn't dare. At night, Hugh came home, a dark cloud hanging over him, and stood in front of me. Fernanda, where's my stuff? His voice was hoarse as he spoke. I just quietly stared at him, saying nothing. Hugh was clearly trying hard to suppress his emotions. Fernanda, I admit I acted inappropriately today. I didn't take your feelings into account. That was my fault. But I did everything you asked. I lost face in front of everyone. Can we stop this now? Can you please give me my things back? I raised my eyebrows slightly. Hugh, you lost face because of your own improper actions, not because of me. Don't you think you owe me an explanation for today? Hugh avoided my gaze. We have a purely professional relationship. I was just rewarding Rachel for doing a good job. I let out a cold laugh and pressed on. Hugh, there are countless ways to reward someone. Why did you have to choose the worst way? A luxury villa, a high-end auction, a couture dress, to an ordinary girl. You know very well what those things symbolize. You wouldn't even agree to take a couple's photo with me. Yet you allowed her to take selfies with you. Every time you indulged her, you sent her a signal of affirmation. That's why she became more and more arrogant, even daring to provoke me. Besides, does her barely passable work performance really deserve your reward? Hugh stayed silent. You favor her because she looks like your first love, don't you? I bluntly exposed his thoughts. But a substitute will always be just a substitute. She will never become that person. Hugh, you need to recognize that. His breathing grew heavier, but he remained silent. I pulled out the small wooden box from behind me and handed it to him, softening my tone. Hugh, I understand your obsession with her resemblance, and I never intended to destroy the beauty of your memories. But I also hope you won't destroy the beauty between us. Today's incident must be the first and the last. Hugh took the small wooden box, set it aside, and then tightly hugged me. Fernanda, I'm sorry. His voice was hoarse. I really know I was wrong. There's truly nothing going on between me and Rachel. From now on, I'll stay far away from her. This kind of thing will never happen again. Please don't stay angry, okay? His voice was full of pleading, his arms tightly wrapped around my waist. I let out a light sigh, nodded, and hugged him back. Chapter 4. The next day. The auction incident and my pointed tweet made Rachel the laughingstock of the entire company. Hugh's obvious attempt to distance himself from her only further cemented the new direction of public opinion. The company was never short of snobbish opportunists. The colleagues who had fawned over her just the day before were now, at best, choosing not to kick her while she was down. Some even went so far as to plaster the company bulletin boards with photos of Rachel attending the auction in a janitor's uniform. In the photos, Rachel's eyes were swollen, and she looked utterly disheveled. Some employees would even openly point at her and whisper as she passed by, "That shameless girl who wears the president's wife's discarded clothes." Rachel's days at the company grew increasingly unbearable. The cafeteria aunties would season her food, causing her to turn pale after just one bite. When she went to the restroom, the door would suddenly lock, trapping her inside for an entire afternoon. The most ridiculous part was that everyone pretended nothing had happened afterward. Her calls for help to Hugh were all directly hung up on. I heard all of this from the executive assistant. "Miss Moo, should I intervene?" he asked. I shook my head. "Assistant Lee, don't overestimate my kindness, and don't underestimate her ambition. Since she chose this path, she must accept the consequences." A week later, the assistant informed me that Rachel hadn't shown up at work for 3 consecutive days. I thought she had finally decided to resign, but reality proved I had underestimated her. That day, Hugh had an extremely important cross-border negotiation scheduled, a project worth at least $100 million. 20 minutes before the meeting, Hugh's phone rang. It was Rachel calling. He expressionlessly pressed the decline button, but immediately afterward, she sent him a message. "President Coup, I'm sorry to disturb you at such a crucial moment. I wanted to thank you personally, but alas, Fate ends here. Thank you for your trust and support. Meeting you has been the greatest fortune of my life. I'll repay your kindness in my next life. Hugh's face turned ashen instantly. He frantically called her back, but no one answered. In a panic, he ordered his assistant to use the GPS locator to find Rachel's location. Postpone today's meeting. He threw down this order and dashed out without looking back. When Hugh arrived at Rachel's apartment, he found her unconscious in the bathtub. Blood kept seeping from the wound on her left wrist, staining the entire bathwater red. Her face was as pale as paper, her breathing weak. Hugh, like a madman, carried her out and rushed her to the hospital for emergency treatment. It was said that on the way, Rachel's body gradually grew colder, just like his first love had when she died in his arms years ago. Luckily, she was saved in time. After learning about the bullying Rachel had suffered at work recently, Hugh fell into a rage. But at that moment, I knew nothing about all this. I happened to be at the same hospital for a prenatal checkup. The results showed I was 6 weeks pregnant. I couldn't wait to share the good news with Hugh. Just as I spotted him walking out of the elevator, I happily ran over to him. I had just opened my mouth when Hugh slapped me hard across the face. The blow sent me staggering to the ground. My cheek burned painfully. I was completely stunned. In all our years of marriage, he had never laid a hand on me. Fernanda, how could you be so vicious? Hugh towered over me, his eyes full of rage and disgust. I already kept my distance from Rachel like you asked, but you wouldn't stop until you drove her to death? I stared at him blankly, utterly confused. She's already lying in the hospital, and you still show up with a smiling face? Are you here to push her into trying again? How did I ever marry a woman as venomous as you? I clenched the prenatal report tightly in my hand, trying to explain, but he didn't spare me another glance. He turned and left without hesitation, watching his retreating figure. I pieced together the truth behind his accusations from his furious words. Rachel had attempted suicide, and Hugh believed it was my fault. Immediately after, I received a call from the executive assistant. Miss Mu, I'm calling to say goodbye. President Hugh just fired me for abuse of authority, and he appointed Secretary Lin to replace me. What? Not just me, anyone who had ever clashed with Secretary Lin was fired as well. Almost the entire staff who had crossed her has been wiped out, while I was eagerly awaiting the arrival of our child. Hugh made his stance painfully clear in the cruelest way possible. He chose Rachel. After hanging up the phone, rage burned through me. I tore the prenatal report into shreds. Hugh, since you've chosen to be so ruthless, don't blame me for being even crueler. Chapter 5. I packed my things and went back to my parents' house. When my father found out I had come home, he didn't ask much. He simply instructed the butler to tidy up my bedroom. But my mother keenly sensed something was wrong. Fernanda, did you have a fight with Hugh? She sat on the edge of my bed and asked softly. I shook my head without answering. The bruise on my wrist was exposed. It was from the fall at the hospital. What happened here? My mother grabbed my wrist, her brow furrowing deeply. It's nothing. I just accidentally bumped into something. I didn't tell them that Hugh had hit me, nor did I mention Rachel. I only said that I wanted to come home for a few days to rest and adjust. But with just a little investigation, my parents found out everything. Half a month passed, and Hugh didn't make a single call or send even a single text. The silent Cold War between us slowly wore down the last warmth we had. Meanwhile, on social media, I saw Rachel publicly posting photos of her attending various events with Hugh. Every carefully selected angle seemed to loudly announce she was about to become Mrs. Hugh. Today, President Hugh took me to an international business summit. So many people thought I was his wife. Thank you, President Hugh. For the limited edition handbag, only someone who truly understands me would know exactly what I love. President Hugh says I'm his lucky star. Today we closed another big deal. One post after another, each paired with intimate photos of her and Hugh. She did it on purpose. She knew I would see it. I chuckled softly and turned off my phone. Late autumn locusts won't jump around for much longer. Half a month later, under my arrangements, my father led a mass withdrawal of investors from the Hugh family business. Hugh Corporation's stock price hit limit down for several consecutive days. On the third day of the stock crash, Hugh's parents showed up at our house. Fernanda, how have you been lately? Mrs. Hugh held my hand, her face full of concern. "I'm doing well," I replied lightly and poured them some tea. "Why did you suddenly move back home?" "Hugh said you weren't feeling well. We were so worried about you," Mrs. Koo asked tentatively. Hugh hadn't even made a phone call. Yet now he was sending his parents to probe for information. "My precious daughter's health is perfectly fine. She's just been in a bad mood lately." My father suddenly spoke, his tone cold. Mr. and Mrs. Koo froze for a moment, exchanging glances. What happened? Did Hugh do something to upset Fernanda? Mr. Koo frowned and asked. My father sneered and heavily placed his teacup on the table. The so-called upbringing of the Koo family is truly an eye-opener. Mr. and Mrs. Koo's expressions changed drastically. My father recounted every detail, one word at a time. How Hugh had installed Rachel in my seaside villa. How he had indulged Rachel's provocations against me. And how, at the hospital, he had blamed everything on me without asking for the truth. Your esteemed son has also removed every employee in the company who ever had friction with that woman. This is the attitude of Koo's fine son toward his lawfully wedded wife. My father said coldly. Mr. and Mrs. Koo's faces turned from pale to ashen, and then back to pale again. This can't be true. Mrs. Koo looked at me in disbelief. Hugh isn't that kind of person. Facts speak louder than words. I said calmly. Mr. Koo, furious, dialed Hugh's number. Get your ass over here right now. You ungrateful brat. You've completely disgraced the Koo family. Mr. Koo slammed down the phone and turned to my father and me, bowing and apologizing repeatedly. I'm sorry, it's our failure in raising him. We will definitely give Fernanda a proper explanation. And what explanation could Hugh possibly give me? Should he lie and say that I was more important to him than Rachel ever was? Or should he tell the truth, that he had long regretted this marriage? Whichever it was, I no longer cared. I got up, returned to my room, and took out the divorce papers. Today, it was time to bring this farce to a definitive end. Chapter 6. Not long after, the front door was pushed open, and Hugh walked in. What shocked me was that Rachel actually came along with him. She hid behind Hugh, looking pitiful and helpless. My parents, who had just slightly softened their expressions after Mr. and Mrs. Koo's apologies, immediately turned grim again. For Hugh to bring her to my house at a time like this, he was truly beyond saving. Mr. Koo stormed up to him and slapped him hard across the face. Ungrateful son! How dare you bring this woman here? Hugh's face instantly swelled up red. Clearly, he hadn't expected his father to hit him in public, and he stood there, stunned. Dad, let me explain. Explain what? Another heavy slap landed on the other side of his face. You've utterly disgraced the Koo family, getting slapped in front of Rachel. Hugh's dignity was completely shattered. He opened his mouth, trying to argue. But Mr. Koo raised his leg and kicked him. Unexpectedly, Rachel rushed over and threw herself in front of Hugh, taking the kick for him. "Ah!" she cried out in pain, falling to the floor, clutching her leg where she had been kicked, her face deathly pale as tears streamed down her cheeks. Mrs. Koo, seeing her pathetic act, was shaking with rage. Shameless slut, still pretending to be pitiful at this point. Mrs. Koo lunged forward to slap her, but Hugh quickly shielded Rachel in his arms. Watching this spectacular performance, I couldn't help but laugh and gently applauded. What a touching pair of lovers. Hugh looked up at me, his eyes full of anger. Fernanda, you wicked woman. Stop slandering my relationship with Rachel. We are innocent, there's nothing improper between us. He held Rachel tightly in his arms. I'm just trying to atone for the excessive things you did before. As soon as those words left his mouth, my father suddenly stood up, furious. What excessive things did my daughter do? Mr. Koo slapped Hugh across the face again. Shut up! Say one more word and I'll break your legs. Mr. Koo then turned to me with an apologetic smile, his voice soft and gentle. Fernanda, we will definitely give you a satisfactory explanation for all of this. I stood up, glanced around the room, and finally fixed my gaze on Hugh. Since today both families are present, and everyone can see the choice Hugh has made, there's no need to drag this marriage on any longer. I pulled out the divorce papers I had long prepared. The divorce agreement has already been drafted and signed by me. The division of assets will follow the prenuptial agreement. Chapter 7. When Rachel heard we were getting divorced, the pained expression on her face instantly disappeared, replaced by a look of triumph. Just moments ago, she had been crying and wailing on the floor. Now she was full of energy. Hugh suddenly threw off Rachel's hand and rushed toward me, his face full of disbelief. "Fernanda, you can't divorce me." "Why not?" I raised my eyebrows slightly. "You were just hugging another woman in your arms. And now you're telling me I can't divorce you?" "I told you. There's nothing improper between Rachel and me," Hugh defended. "Hugh, I don't care what your relationship with Rachel is. I only know that you have already chosen her, and not me. Since that's the case, there's no point in continuing." I looked straight at him, speaking each word clearly. "Hugh, remember when we first got married? I told you very clearly. I absolutely hate it when people touch what's mine. Yet you crossed that line, again and again. How many chances did I give you? And how many did you actually cherish? When something gets dirty, you throw it away. The same goes for people." I stared directly into his eyes. "Hugh, I don't want you anymore." Hugh's face turned deathly pale in an instant. I picked up the divorce papers and handed them to him. "The assets are divided according to the prenuptial agreement. It's very fair to you." Hugh didn't take them. "Fernanda, I won't sign. You're just angry right now." At that moment, my father stood up. "President Hugh, if the two parties can divorce peacefully, future cooperation is still possible. Otherwise, all discussions are off the table." Hugh Corporation was already at its last gasp. If the partnership truly collapsed, the damage would be immeasurable. Mr. Hugh thought for a moment, then gave Hugh a fierce glare. "Sign it!" Under the pressure from his parents, Hugh finally signed. Just like that, Hugh and I were officially divorced. Rachel stood to the side, unable to hide the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. I met her gaze and smiled slightly. "Congratulations, Rachel, you've successfully climbed up." That one sentence made Mr. and Mrs. Hugh completely explode. "You bitch!" Mrs. Hugh grabbed Rachel's hair, her voice distorted with rage. "It's all your fault." I called the butler over. "See them out." Just then, the housekeeper came in carrying a bowl of medicine. "Miss, the prenatal tonic is ready. Please drink it while it's still warm." Everyone from the Hugh family froze. "Fernanda, you're pregnant?" Hugh's voice was hoarse beyond recognition. I took the bowl from the housekeeper, drank it, and then looked at Hugh. "Last month, the day you hit me at the hospital, I had come to share this good news with you, but you didn't even want to hear a single word from me." I spoke calmly. Hugh's lips trembled, unable to form a response. "From that day on, you forever lost the chance to be this child's father." When my father heard this, his face changed dramatically. "What? He dared to hit you?" My father crossed the room in 3 large strides and punched Hugh squarely in the face. Hugh staggered back but didn't resist. "You beast! You dared to hit my daughter? And while she was pregnant?" My father roared. Hugh's mouth bled from the punch, but he just stared blankly at me, his eyes full of pain and regret. "Fernanda," he murmured my name, his voice filled with pleading. "Give me another chance. Just one more. Please." "Another chance?" I let out a cold laugh. "I already gave you plenty, didn't I?" Hugh completely broke down and fell to his knees. "Butler, see them out." Without hesitation, the butler ushered the Hugh family out. Mr. Hugh dragged the already mentally collapsed Hugh up, while Mrs. Hugh, still grabbing Rachel's hair, pushed her roughly out the door. Chapter 8. In the end, the Hugh Corporation narrowly avoided bankruptcy. But the impact of the divorce was irreversible. Within just a few weeks, the company's stock price had plummeted nearly 40%. Several major partners had canceled their projects, and a dozen core investors had pulled out. Hugh was no longer the decisive, powerful CEO he once was. He shut himself up in the villa all day long. Empty wine bottles scattered everywhere. Alcohol had become his refuge, and the moments he was sober were few and far between. Rachel, unwilling to give up the hard-earned opportunity she had gained, visited the villa every day to take care of him. She cleaned the rooms, cooked him sobering soups, and even carefully wiped his body when he was too drunk to move. "President Hugh, have some water," Rachel said. holding out a glass. Hugh lifted his bloodshot eyes. His gaze focused for a moment, then turned hazy again. Diana, you've come back, haven't you? He reached out and touched Rachel's cheek. Rachel froze. This was already the 17th time. 17 times. Hugh had mistaken her for his dead first love. I'm not Diana. I'm Rachel, she whispered, forcing herself to stay calm despite the bitterness in her heart. Hugh seemed not to hear, mumbling to himself, Diana, don't leave again this time, please. Enough, Rachel screamed, slamming the glass onto the floor, shattering it into pieces. Startled by the noise, Hugh looked at her in confusion. I've been so stupid. Rachel's voice trembled. How could I fall for a man like you, a man who only sees someone else when he looks at me? You deserve everything that's happened. You brought this on yourself. Rachel finally exploded, all her long-suppressed grievances and jealousy pouring out. You had a wife you didn't cherish. Now look at you, still obsessed with your damn first love. Hugh's eyes sharpened instantly, the drunken haze clearing from them for the first time in days. Rachel, don't you dare speak about her like that. Get out. Rachel sneered coldly. You're still protecting her? You know she's not even dead? Hugh froze. What nonsense are you talking about? Nonsense? Let me tell you, she's alive. She faked her death and took $50 million from your parents, and she left a will making you promise to keep supporting that worthless boyfriend of hers. Rachel screamed hysterically. Hugh suddenly grabbed her by the neck, slamming her against the wall. Shut up! Rachel struggled, her face turning purple. Hugh let go, and she collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. You think I learned all your secrets by myself? She found me. She wanted even more money, more power, so she helped me climb the ladder. Hugh's face turned ashen, his body swaying. Impossible. Diana is dead? Rachel let out a mocking laugh. Ask your parents. Ask them if they gave her $50 million. Hugh, trembling, dialed his father. The call was short, but it shattered him completely. His father's long silence and weak denials told him everything. Because of two venomous women like you, I actually hurt Fernanda, he murmured brokenly, his voice barely coherent. Rachel laughed wildly at the sight of him collapsing. Hugh, you have no one to blame but yourself. You're the one who pushed away the woman who loved you most. Hugh suddenly raised his head. Get out! Never let me see you again. Hugh returned to the company. He immediately convened an emergency board meeting, swiftly cutting ties with multiple shady partners. 3 days later, the once celebrated Storm Tech announced its bankruptcy. The founder, Huang Storm, was taken away by police for investigation over financial fraud. This was the very company founded by Diana's boyfriend, the one Hugh had been secretly supporting all along. Meanwhile, Rachel received a text from an unknown number. I know it was you who betrayed me. As night fell, Rachel quickened her pace, feeling as if someone was following her. She turned into a narrow alley, trying to take a shortcut home. The next morning, the front page of the newspaper carried a shocking headline. 2 women found dead in alley, police suspect mutual homicide. Hugh stared at the newspaper, his eyes falling on the 2 names. Rachel, Diana. Chapter 9. Time flew by. Serena Moo was almost 1 year old now. Her little face round and adorable, with eyes like mine and a nose like Hugh's. Every time I saw her sleeping peacefully, I couldn't help but shower her chubby cheeks with kisses. I named her Serena, hoping she would live her life in peace and joy, free from worries. Mom, Serena learned a new word today, I said excitedly, holding my daughter as my mother returned from the garden. My mother put down the scissors and reached out to take Serena, her face filled with pride. Our Serena is the smartest. Come on, call Grandma. Grandma, Serena babbled sweetly, making my mother laugh out loud with delight. After retiring, my parents handed the company over to me. Their greatest joy now was spending time with their granddaughter. Hugh had come to our door many times, kneeling to beg for a second chance at marriage. Each time, I firmly refused. The damage had already been done. Some things, no matter how many apologies are made, could never be repaired. Fernanda. Mr. Koo called again, my father said. I shook my head. Dad, rules are rules. Until Serena turns 3, they're not allowed to visit. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Serena grew into a bright, lively little girl. Her stubborn personality almost identical to mine. When she finally met Mr. and Mrs. Koo for the first time, she sweetly called them Grandpa and Grandma, moving the elderly couple to tears. Hugh stood nearby, his eyes full of hope. "Serena, I'm your daddy." Serena tilted her little head and looked at him seriously. "Mommy said that if you make a mistake, you have to accept the consequences. You made Mommy sad, so I can't call you daddy." The room fell silent. Hugh knelt down, trying to look her in the eyes. "Daddy knows he was wrong. Daddy is really sorry." "Being sorry isn't enough," Serena said, her voice both childish and solemn. "Mommy said that some things, once they happen, can't be undone." Hugh looked up at me, his eyes full of pain and regret. I met his gaze, smiling softly without saying a word. Once, he had the chance to have a complete and happy family, but he had shattered it with his own hands. Now, my career was flourishing. I had an adorable daughter and loving parents. Life was full and wonderful. No one is indispensable. Hugh came to see Serena every day. Each time he left, he would stand outside in the yard, quietly watching us through the living room window. I knew what he was thinking. If he could turn back time, he would have made different choices. But life doesn't offer second chances. Everyone must live with the consequences of their choices. And I no longer needed late apologies, nor anyone's guilt.